In the blue corner, weighing in at 1,030 grams, the Spiel des Jahres 2014 winner, Camel Up. And the challenger at 1.216 kilograms, Camel Up, second edition.
Hey guys, Lachlan here from Nerds of the West, and today we're going to be looking at one of our favorite games, Camel Up. We've got the first edition from 2014 and the second edition from 2018, and we're going to compare the two and see if it's worth the changes they made, such as their ambiguous title to now the very clear Camel Up. So one of the biggest things that they've changed from the first edition to the second edition would be the art style, and they've really cleaned up the title. I'm sure you've had arguments with your own group about what this game is called. Is it Camel Up? Is it Camel Cup? Every time our group plays, whoever wins gets to decide the name until we play again next time. We've had Formula C, we've had Camel Trophy Race, we've had everything under the sun. But this time, they've really done away with that. There's no ambiguity, there's no grey area, it is simply Camel Up. There's no arguments. This also leads into their more mature art style. They've gone for sort of watercolors instead of the more toony style, and they've really cleaned their look up a bit, I think, to really bring in a new audience. Let's take a look under the hood, see what we've got here. So, pretty standard, we've got the rules, which comes in two varieties, German and English, which is what you need if you want to win the Spiel des Jahres, like this bad boy has. You've got the game board. Game board's pretty standard. We'll go through that later in components. But everything else is just kind of thrown in. You've got your pyramid, which the game is basically designed around. One of the coolest things about this game is this pyramid, and it's just kind of in the corner here and everything else is thrown in. One of my baggies is actually like split, and now the components are in here. This is giving me some serious anxiety. Let's just put that away. So let's have a look-see under box number 2. The second edition comes with its rulebook. This time only comes in English and no German to be seen. And then you've got your chunky, beefy game board, all nicely folded up. And everything else is in here in a perfect organization. There's a spot for your coins, for your 5s, for your 1s. You've got your character cards, you've got your camels in their own section, the dice have their own section, the pyramid is slotted away lovely. This is what you want from a modern board game, to have things organized inside your box. And it's even got a recess for where the board will end up sitting. So it tucks away beautifully. A much cleaner experience than first edition. With both of them set up side by side, you can see there's a great difference between the two. So let's jump in and compare the components of the two games. Let's start with the board. The board in the first edition is square, it's functional, and I used to love this board. It did everything that you needed to do. Everything's laid out in a perfect location. The pyramid has its own spot, which hasn't changed for the second edition. Everything still has its own location, but it's hard to love the first edition's board when it's so square and functional in comparison to the new art style of second edition. I mean, look at those curves. Can you really go past it? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. This pop-up palm tree is one of the coolest things that I have seen in a board game ever. I mean, to say that this game is pretty is an understatement. I mean, it already has depth because you've got verticality, which gives it that 3D feel, but they've really upped themselves from the first edition of just going, here's a 3D pyramid, which is cool in itself and was amazing when you first opened the game and put it together. But now they've gone, you've still got your 3D pyramid and you've got a pop-up goddamn palm tree. How freaking cool is that? The layout hasn't changed a hell of a lot. You've still got your absolute first and absolute last locations from the first game, but now they've kind of gone with a better iconography for it. It's easier to see what you're getting. The first edition went with a more symmetrical layout, which is, again, back to functionality instead of having the asymmetrical layout, which I think is more appealing and pleases the eye better. But that is all preference. It might be easier to lay out the symmetrical version, but that is like nitpicking down to the wire. One of the advantages of being so square was that it was easy for them to add on the expansion onto the bottom of the board, whereas in the second edition, it's probably going to be a little bit harder, and I don't think we're going to see an expansion like we did the first. The best part about this game, besides the camels, is the pyramids. The first edition's made out of like some hefty cardstock, and it's nice, it's fun to put together. It gives that three-dimensional feel and height to the game, which is awesome, but the push lever is simply just on there using a rubber band, and we've had these break on us in the past. It's cool, and at the time, it was amazing. But second edition just ups that by giving you a plastic one that's spring-loaded, and there's no fear of it breaking down like the first edition one. So in many ways, this is a much better component than what you've got in the first one. I still love it, it's still great, but it's a little bit smaller, but it feels better as well because you don't have this jutting out lever and more durable. The camels themselves have changed from wood in the first edition to plastic in the second edition, and that goes same with the dice. They've done the same thing. They've gone from wood to plastic, which, I mean, arguably is a subjective call of whether or not you prefer wood over plastic, but the colors do pop more with the painted wood figures than they do with the plastic. But I personally like them. I know Tom doesn't, but that's his preference. And they are a little bit bigger in the first edition as well. The dice we mentioned, they've gone from being wood. They are a lot bigger in the first edition to the second edition. They're these really small ones. They've reduced the size, which doesn't make any difference because they're still easy to read. They still feel good, and you don't really roll them, so it's not going to feel worse in your hand because you don't actually roll them. The pyramid does all the work for you. For the bedding tiles, they're both good quality cardstock. They both feel really nice. I think they're actually nearly identical in terms of printing quality, so there's nothing to compare in terms of that. The iconography on the first edition is a little bit easier to read than the second edition, but the second edition looks nicer because, again, they've changed the art style. Both really good components. The pyramid tiles, every time that you roll the pyramid, you would take a tile, and this is, again, cardstock. And they've gone from being a standard size similar to the bedding style, so they've just gone with a stock standard size, to a unique shape of being a, I don't know what this is.
Weird-ass hexagon.
But they've gone for their own unique shape, which gives it a little bit more character than being the same as the bedding tiles, and it's easier to differentiate them so you won't forget them this time around. The personal cards, huge difference. They've really upped the style and art for them. With the first edition, it's easier to tell which character you are because you've got a larger icon on the back of the character's face, as opposed to the second edition, where it's a itty-bitty little face. But when you flip them over, they're about the same to tell the difference between who you're betting on. They serve their function, they're nice. I don't know why they didn't use this character model on the back of the card instead of this tiny little portrait, whereas this one's a huge portrait and then basically a small portrait on the back side. They've kind of inverted it. They're nice. The new edition obviously has a bit more going on for it with no more white borders. Really minor difference between the two. So the Oasis tiles have changed completely from being an Oasis and a desert tile in the first edition to slow or speed up your camel depending on which side you put down, to a cheering tile or a spectator tile, which is the audience cheering on your camel to speed them up or slow them down depending on which side you put it on. The second edition is probably a little bit easier to read because you've now got a green +1, which is better than a red +1 on the first edition, so it's definitely more clear of slowing down or speeding up. The first player marker, I don't even know what the hell this is, but this is the first player marker. It's there, I don't know what it is, and this one is the Sphinx, but with a camel on the front, and it's a bit funny as well. The coins. The coins in second edition are plastic now. Thank the heavens, we no longer have this cardstock that you have in the first edition. We can all agree that cardstock is not as nice for coins. The plastic just feels better, it sounds better. But with the second edition, they've also completely done away with your 10s and 20s. So there's no longer notes for when you get into high denominations. You've only got 5s and you've only got 1s. You no longer have 20s and 10s, which is fine. It's just a matter of having more coins on you, which I guess feels better. The aim of the game is still the same. It's to get the most money at the end of the race, and you bet during each leg. So the first game you could play with 2 to 8 players, and with the expansion expand up to 10. And then the second edition you play from 3 to 8 from the get-go with no expansion up to 10. So like we mentioned before with the board, the expansion adds on, it just sort of lays on top of the old board, and you get extra map area for the expansion. They also add in a partner cards, which is a whole nother mechanic, which is actually included in the second edition, but you play with that when you have 6 or more players. The biggest difference between the two is the black and white camels, the crazy camels. They've been disqualified and they're running around counterclockwise to the track, and they could pick up the stack of camels and carry it back towards the starting line. This is shown by one of the dice, which has actually got a black and a white number on there, so they're represented by their own dice. So now there's 6 dice instead of the 5 from the first game. In the first edition, you would roll all 5 dice, so all the camels would move at least once, whereas in the second edition, you roll 5 dice, so someone is not going to move in a round. So one of the things they added from the first edition's expansion was the partnership cards, which you only play with if you've got 6 or more players. And it allows you to make a partnership with another player. At the end of the leg, you get to take the reward of one of the betting tiles that your partner has taken and add it to your winnings. So with all of that said, we love Camel Up. We've played it so many times that the rubber bands on our pyramid have broken on more than one occasion. And the first edition is really good, and we still really appreciate it. And I think I prefer the first edition because you've got the expansion. But aesthetically, it's hard to go past the second edition, which streamlines so many things. There's a couple of rules in there that I think that they broke with the crazy camels. That's just my personal opinion. But you could totally take those out and play the standard rules from the first edition, but you don't get the expansions with the second edition. You just lose out on that expansion of the board that you have in the first one that you can't do in the second one because you've got these sexy curves. Let us know if you agree or disagree. Do you like the first edition over the pretty new flash second edition? And if you want to see them played in full, we've got those both on our channel as well. Like and subscribe, and I've been Lachlan from Nerds of the West.